And joining us for today's roundtable is Communications Director, a Club for Growth, Doug Sachtleben. Also with us, former Deputy Staff Secretary to President Bill Clinton, David Goodfriend. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us.
Thank you.
David, so far in the election year, it's kind of been the year of the outsiders, and it's been difficult for any of the governors in this race to gain any traction, yet that isn't stopping them from trying to tout their experience as something that should matter to voters. Does it matter, though, to voters, and should it?
I think it does, and I certainly think it should. And I think the reason you're hearing this now is Marco Rubio. These are candidates who I believe are trying to both bring down Marco Rubio, but also contrast themselves to him. I think Chris Christie's probably the poster child for this, but John Kasich ain't no slouch either. They are pointing out that Rubio doesn't have a lot of executive or any executive experience, and they're trying to show that they themselves have executive experience. Look, voters may vote with their head or they might vote with their heart. If they vote with their head, they're going to look for experience. They're going to look for proven ability. If they vote with their heart, they're just going to go with whoever makes them feel good. And I guess in an election, I would say heart usually wins over head. This is going to be an attempt by those governors to bring people down to reality. It's not unlike Hillary Clinton speaking to Democrats and contrasting herself with Bernie Sanders, saying that she has the experience that he lacks.
Well, Doug, one guy who's been trying to play to both the head and the heart is Chris Christie, and he talked today about having his eye in second place. Let's take a listen.
As we see with Bill Clinton, as we saw with Barack Obama, second place finishes and made president, so we'll see.
Well, no polls have Christie finishing second, nowhere close to that, in fact. But, Doug, do you think it's time for Christie to get out if he isn't able to pull off a miracle here and finish second place?
Yeah, the Granite State may be the end of the line for Governor Christie. As some of the other candidates have sort of joked, he's made a pitch here almost for governor of New Hampshire for the amount of time he's spent, for the focus that he's put on that state, and to still be in the single digits, to still be showing around fourth or fifth. It's a referendum at this point for him, and it doesn't look very promising.
Well, with Donald Trump favored to win New Hampshire, it is a fierce battle for second place, as John just mentioned. That's what Christie was hoping for right now. This graphic compiling information from Pivot shows that the varying odds for each candidate over the past month. But as of late this afternoon, Marco Rubio has a probability of 34%, with Cruz and Kasich hovering now between 24 and 25%. David, will Rubio be second place in New Hampshire, or could there be an upset there? You mentioned Kasich earlier.
I'm betting on an upset just because New Hampshire voters and Republican voters in New Hampshire are so unpredictable. And I think that the sort of, I don't know, the image of the kind of curmudgeonly independent voter in New Hampshire plays out here. I don't think the polished young guy from South Florida is going to carry the day over the grittier, more realistic candidates. But that's just my take on New Hampshire voters. Anybody could be surprised here, including me.
So when you say you think there's going to be an upset, do you think it's going to be Kasich who's going to come in second place?
Well, I think I've told you guys on this show, I made it onto a Kasich commercial.
Yes.
Is that why you're being tight-lipped right now?
Listen, I said, as a Democrat, I fear John Kasich. His campaign took that right off Newsmax and put it on their commercial. So I still fear John Kasich. I still think he'd be a formidable candidate. I think perhaps the ability of primary voters in New Hampshire to bring in rather independent primary voters to vote in this election is a good sign for Kasich. I wouldn't be at all surprised if he came in second.
But really the question is, how badly does he need this?
He needs it very badly. The other guy who needs to come in, not necessarily second place, but have a strong showing, is Marco Rubio. Doug, Marco Rubio talked about his win, if you want to call it that, his third place finish in Iowa. Where do you think Rubio needs to stack up in the final vote tally to carry some momentum towards South Carolina?
I think he's got to show high teens, perhaps touching on 20%, and that would get him somewhere right around that second place finish. I think he's got to continue to show that sort of 3-2-1 approach was kind of what we've heard the Rubio campaign at least had been thinking about. Third place in Iowa, second place in New Hampshire, and then a win in South Carolina, which seems tough right now, still an uphill battle in South Carolina. But I think he's still in a place for a good position tonight. We heard Governor Kasich over the last couple of days positioning himself as sort of in between Sanders and Clinton. I thought that was interesting saying at a town hall that he's not too hot, he's not too cold, he's just right. Interesting place for a Republican candidate to be, but in New Hampshire, that may still make him a decent candidate, even on the Republican side.
Yeah, anything goes almost, including robots and exorcisms, things we've talked about happening on the campaign
Getting
trail
a little odd out there.
today. David, we're going to talk about the Democrats here in just a minute, but from a Democrat's perspective, the last week in New Hampshire, to you, what has been the most compelling storyline to come out of New Hampshire?
Well, I think that the fact that Hillary Clinton has really sharpened her elbows against Bernie Sanders has been, on the Democratic side, perhaps the most stark development. You know, she played it very cool for a long time, and New Hampshire is a state where she's predicted to come in behind Sanders, and the question has been, how much will she lose by? If she tightens that loss to, let's say, between 5 and 15%, that'll be viewed as a win, much the same way that Marco Rubio declared victory for coming in third in Iowa. So the surprising thing to me has been the ferocity of the exchanges between Clinton and Sanders over a state that Sanders was favored to win, and nothing, I think, is going to change that. That's been a pretty interesting development on the Democratic side.
So David, let me ask you that, like percentage-wise, you said, she's expected to come in second, but how close does that gap need to be for her to kind of consider this a win?
I think it's good. It's not the raw number that I think her campaign will look at. They'll ask themselves, did we win among registered Democrats? Did we win among women? Did we win among certain key demographics that they're going to pursue nationwide? They're not expecting to win New Hampshire outright. But I said earlier, anything between 5 and 15 percentage points difference will be viewed as a victory, I think, by the Clinton campaign, because that will have narrowed what was a formidable lead by a neighboring state senator.
Yeah, you guys stick around. We got much more to come. We're going to talk a little bit more about some of the headwinds facing the Hillary Clinton campaign, talks of a possible shakeout, and much more. But you can tell that this is personal to the Clintons, specifically to Bill Clinton. You listened to him on the stump the last couple of days. He really wants Hillary to do well in New Hampshire. He wants to repeat the success of Bill Clinton, the comeback hit, and a second-place finish in 1992. We're going to come right back. We got more David Goodfriend and Doug Sachtleben. Right after this, again, we're going to talk about Hillary Clinton, the email probe, the FBI confirmation of the investigation, and a former Obama advisor saying, it's not about them, it's about you, Madam Secretary. Doug and welcome back. Today, the Clinton campaign now pushing back after rumors started to surface of a possible campaign staff shakeup. An article from Politico reports, quote, the Clintons are not happy and have been letting all of us know that. That from a close source to the Clintons. A focus of their dissatisfaction in recent days is the campaign's top pollster and strategist, Joel Benison, whom one Clinton insider described as being on thin ice. Meanwhile, today Clinton smiled as she greeted voters early this morning in New Hampshire. But just yesterday, the FBI officially confirmed the investigation of the presidential candidate's use of a private email server. The Bureau's General Counsel, I should say, filed a letter in federal court in compliance with a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit. The IG says the probe is, quote, ongoing, but added the FBI has not publicly commented on the focus, scope, or potential targets of the investigation. Also, pressure mounting on Loretta Lynch. The Hill reports that even if no evidence of wrongdoing is found, Clinton's many critics are unlikely to take the word of an appointee of President Obama and will doubt that justice has been served. Several top Senate Republicans are calling for a special prosecutor to be brought in, although it has not exactly reached that threshold. Meanwhile, former Obama advisor David Axelrod tweeted this yesterday: when the exact same problems crop up in separate campaigns with different staff, at what point do the principals say, hey, maybe it's us? The Washington Post called the timing of this tweet particularly interesting, following that Politico report we just talked about a possible Clinton shakeup. The latest episode of Axelrod's podcast featuring that Clinton pollster as a guest. His name, again, Joel Benison. He worked with Axelrod on Obama's campaigns in 2008 and 2012. He also was the aide singled out, as we mentioned, as being on thin ice. Meanwhile, Monday night in New Hampshire, Clinton hinted that Republicans, specifically Karl Rove's super PAC, American Crossroads, were to blame for the campaign problems.
They started their own little super PAC. They got Karl Rove involved because they want to convince people to vote for my opponent because they know what I know. I get it. and they will not get you if I am your president, because I will know exactly how to stop them.
All right, back with us for part 2 of the roundtable. Doug Sachtleben, Communications Director of the Club for Growth. Also David Goodfriend, former Bill Clinton staffer. David, no matter what the outcome of the FBI investigation, the Wall Street transcript issue, the potential shakeup, true or not, these are not the kinds of storylines you want swirling around your campaign at this stage of the game, right?
Oh, they're going to be swirling around. I mean, this is well-trod territory for the Clinton family, and I think they expected it. What I do think, though, is that I read a little bit differently into the actions of Senator Cornyn calling for a special prosecutor. I think if the Republicans in Congress believed that the FBI was going to move forward, that they had a good case, that it would be too hard for any attorney general to turn down a prosecution, they'd be sitting pretty, they'd be sitting tight. But I believe what's going on here is they don't think there's going to be an indictment, and they want to set the political table so that when that happens, they can say, aha, this is all politics, and try to keep the issue alive. It's not a bad strategy. I give them credit for trying to put themselves in a position to win either way. Win if there is an indictment, win if there isn't. But the attorneys that I speak to, if I just keep this to a very black and white legal question, the need for a special prosecutor here is not met.
Right.
And the FBI, I don't think it's really news per se that the FBI has been doing this investigation. I mean, I think we all have understood that for a while. And the fact that in your send up to the story, you say there's mounting pressure on Loretta Lynch. Well, there are certainly mounting calls from Republicans on her. Whether she feels political pressure to behave any differently when there's a team of professional attorneys at the Department of Justice who handle this, I don't think that's the case. So I think what Senator Cornyn is doing, and it's a perfectly legitimate political strategy, is to set the table for the event where the Department of Justice does not bring an indictment against Secretary Clinton.
All right, well, that's some good spin coming from you. I appreciate it, David. That's why we'd like to have you on the show to get your perspective on this. But Doug, Hillary Clinton has long complained about the vast right-wing conspiracy. Are voters going to buy that from her this time around during this Democratic primary?
I don't think so. The polls show repeatedly that she is not heavily trusted. I mean, even among Democrats, you saw a poll come out just about a month or so ago that said a quarter of Democrats have a trust issue with Hillary. 3/4 almost of independents question her. It's a real issue here for her. And it's not so much the campaign as it is the candidate. People struggle with the candidate. Her likability numbers are often not good in some of the polling when you look at some of the crosstabs. People look at her in an unfavorable way. They can't relate to her. Bernie Sanders is finding that connection, at least with younger progressives. And this case, you know, the words in that letter, ongoing legal effort, tell us that there is something continuing. You can spin it however you want, but there is still something here that's beyond just a security review at this point.
David, I just want to ask you, regardless of whether or not this leads to a federal indictment, and I understand your theory and what Doug was saying, do you think the optics of all this is hurting Hillary and will continue to hurt her?
No, I think that whatever numbers we see on Hillary they bake in this perception. And, you know, my colleague who just mentioned it, I don't disagree with that at all. I just think that where you see her winning 70% to 20% among African Americans against Bernie Sanders, for example, it's not like they don't know any of this. It's already baked into the perception of her. So the more you try to pile on, this is always the mistake everybody makes with the Clintons. It's like, you already said Bill Clinton, was unfaithful to his wife. You already said it. The more you say it, it looks like now you're just trying to pile on. And then at a certain point, Americans sort of back away from that and say, wait a second, that's not fair.
That's right. We have to leave it there, gentlemen. David and Doug, thanks so much for joining us. Pleasure to have you. There's still more to come. You're watching Newsmax Now.